Hello everybody and welcome to my channel. My name is Hanna. This is Rainier Books. I was looking for my Rockaway Beach cap from Oregon from my holiday there like 6 years ago, because today I'm going to talk about the National Book Award for Fiction. The Longlist was published yesterday in the afternoon Swedish time, I think pretty early in the United States, probably around noontime. And there are 10 books that surprised me quite a bit because I hadn't heard about many of them earlier. There was only one prediction that I made from the prediction video that I made. There was only one book that actually made the list, and that is Chain Gang All-Stars by Kwame, Adjei-Brenyah, published by Pantheon. This book about gladiators and the prison system in the near future of the United States, which shows apparently the inhumanity of the American prison system, of the incarceration system, where primarily black people are incarcerated and where there are companies, big private companies, who make a lot of money on people being incarcerated. There's no other country in the world that has as many incarcerated people as the United States, and Kwame Adjei-Brenyah takes up that issue in his book. And he sort of uses gladiators, black gladiators, to women who are in the front of this book, who are the protagonists. It is a time where they fight gladiator fights, life or death, freedom or death, in the prison system, where they broadcast this on television. They stream that on different online applications, on online apps, and make even more money with the prisoners. And yeah, the book is apparently a huge bestseller also in the United States. And that was also already the first title that I talked about. But then here come the other 9 titles that are nominated. There's a lot of historical fiction. We will count that on the way when we go through the books by looking what the publishers have written to sort of introduce the books. And lots of them historical, and you know that I'm not the guy who's so much interested in historical fiction. I prefer to read about my lifetime, at least, I would say. It can be, which is quite long now, but I could look back like a couple of decades. That's no problem for me. But looking back into the 14th and 15th and 16th, even the 19th century, makes it, for me at least, very difficult sometimes to read, because I want to be in the present. So let's look at the books. The first one is a collection of short stories that made the longlist. 2 collections of short stories made the longlist. And this one is very interesting, I think. This is Temple Folk by Aaliyah Bilal, published by Simon and Schuster. A groundbreaking debut collection portraying the experiences of black Muslims grappling with faith, family, and freedom in America. Actually, it wouldn't need more to pique my interest for this book. I want to read this. In Temple Folk, black Muslims contemplate the convictions of their race, religion, economics, politics, and sexuality in America. The 10 stories in this collection contribute to the bounty of diverse narratives about black life by intimately portraying the experiences of a community that resists the mainstream culture to which they are expected to accept and aspire to while functioning within the country in which they are born. In Due North, an obedient daughter struggles to understand why she's haunted by the spirit of a recently deceased father. In Who's Down, a father, after a brief affair with vegetarianism, conspires with his daughter to order him a double cheeseburger. In Candy for Hanif, a mother's routine trip to the store for her disabled son takes an unlikely turn when she reflects on a near-death experience. In Woman in Niqab, a daughter's suspicion of her father's infidelity prompts her to wear her hair in public. In New Mexico, a federal agent tasked with spying on a high-ranking member of the Nation of Islam grapples with his responsibilities closer to home. With an unflinching eye for the contradictions between what these characters profess to believe and what they do, Temple Folk accomplishes the rare feat of presenting moral failures with compassion, nuance, and humor to remind us that while perfection is what many of us strive for, it is the errors that make us human. Very interesting book. Ponyboy by Eliot Duncan, published by Norton. I hadn't heard of that one either. In the first of 3 acts, Ponyboy's titular narrator, a pill-popping, speed-snorting, trans-masculine lightning bolt, unravels in his Paris apartment. Ponyboy is caught in a messy love triangle with Baby, a lesbian painter who can't see herself being with someone trans, and Tony, a childhood friend who can actually see Ponyboy for who he is. Strung out, Ponyboy follows Baby to Berlin in Act 2, where he sinks deeper into drugs and falls for Hart, a fellow writer all the while pursued by a megalomaniacal photographer hungry for the next hot thing. As Ponyboy's relationships crumble, he overdoses and finds himself alone in his childhood home in Nebraska. The novel's final act follows Ponyboy to rehab, exploring the ways in which trans identity, addiction, and recovery reforged the bond between mother and child. Eliot Duncan reveals in precise atmospheric prose, reminiscent of Anne Carson and Allen Ginsberg, the innate splendor, joy, and ache of becoming oneself. Sounds also very interesting to me. The next book is already longlisted for the Booker Prize. This is This Other Eden by Paul Harding, published by Norton. The first historical book. In 1792, formerly enslaved Benjamin Honey and his Irish wife, Patience, discovered an island where they could make a life together. More than a century later, the Honey's descendants remain there with an eccentric, diverse band of neighbors, a pair of sisters raising 3 Penobscot orphans, Theophilus and Candace Larks, and their nocturnal brood, the prophetic Zachary Hand to God Proverbs, a Civil War veteran who carves biblical images in a hollow tree. Then comes the intrusion of civilization, eugenics-minded state, officials determined to cleanse the island, and a missionary schoolteacher selects one light-skinned boy to save. The rest will succumb to the authorities' institutions or cast themselves on the waters in a new Noah's Ark. Full of lyricism and power, This Other Eden explores the hopes and dreams and resilience of those seen not to fit a world brutally intolerant of difference. We continue with historical books. Loot by Tania James, published by Knopf. A spellbinding historical novel set in the 18th century. A hero's quest, a love story, the story of a young artist coming of age, and an exuberant heist adventure that traces the bloody legacy of colonialism across 2 continents and 50 years. A wildly inventive, irresistible feat of storytelling from a writer at the height of her powers. Blurbed by the great Maggie O'Farrell, writing, "Loot held me spellbound from the first page. This is an expertly plotted, deeply affecting novel about war, displacement, emigration, and an elusive, mechanical tiger." Abbas is just 17 years old when his gifts as a woodcarver come to the attention of Tipu, Sultan, and he is drawn into service at the palace in order to build a giant tiger automaton for Tipu's sons, a gift to commemorate their return from British captivity. His fate and the fate of the wooden tiger he helps create will mirror the vicissitudes of nations and dynasties ravaged by war across India and Europe. Working alongside the legendary French clockmaker Lucien Deleuze, Abbas owns his craft, learns French, and meets Jeanne, the daughter of a French expatriate. When Deleuze is finally permitted to return home to Rouen, he invites Abbas to come along as his apprentice. But by the time Abbas travels to Europe, Tipu's palace has been looted by British forces, and the tiger automaton has disappeared. To prove himself, Abbas must retrieve the tiger from an estate in the English countryside where it is displayed in a collection of plundered art. This is not my piece of cake. And now comes the third historical novel by a very famous author. I read her very early, when I was very young, many, many years ago. This is Night Watch by Jayne and Phillips, published by Knopf. From one of our most accomplished novelists, says the publisher, a mesmerizing story about a mother and daughter seeking refuge in the chaotic aftermath of the Civil War. In 1874, in the wake of the war, erasure, trauma, and namelessness haunt civilians and veterans, renegades and wanderers, freedmen and runaways. 12-year-old Kona Lee, the adult in her family for as long as she can remember, finds herself on a buckboard journey with her mother, Eliza, who hasn't spoken in more than a year. They arrive at the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in West Virginia, delivered to the hospital's entrance by a war veteran who was forced himself into their world. There, far from family, a beloved neighbor, and the mountain home they knew, they tried to reclaim their lives. The omnipresent vagaries of war and race rise to the surface as we learn their flight to the highest mountain ridges of western Virginia, the disappearance of Kona Lee's father who left for the war and never returned. Meanwhile, in the asylum, they begin to find a new path. Kona Lee pretends to be her mother's maid. Eliza responds slowly to treatment. They get swept up in the life of the facility, the mysterious man they call the Night Watch, the orphan child called Wheat, the fearsome woman who runs the kitchen, the remarkable doctor at the head of the institution. Epic, enthralling, and meticulously crafted, Night Watch is a brilliant portrait of family endurance against all odds, and a stunning chronicle of surviving war and its aftermath. The next one I am pretty happy to have already found on the app that I'm subscribing to for audiobooks is A Council of Dolls by Mona Susan Power and published by Mariner. From the mid-century metropolis of Chicago to the windswept ancestral lands of the Dakota people, to the bleak and brutal Indian boarding schools, A Council of Dolls is the story of three women, told in part through the stories of the dolls they carried. Sissy, born 1961. Sissy's relationship with her beautiful and volatile mother is difficult, even dangerous, but her life is also filled with beautiful things, including a new Christmas present, a doll called Ethel. Ethel whispers advice and kindness in Sissy's ear, and in one especially terrifying moment, maybe even saves Sissy's life. Lillian, born 1925. Born in her ancestral lands in a time of terrible change, Lillian clings to her sister Blanche and her doll May. When the sisters are forced to attend an Indian school far from their home, Blanche refuses to be cowed by the school's abusive nuns. But when tragedy strikes the sisters, the doll May finds her way to defend the girls. Cora, born 1888, though she was born into the brutal legacy of the Indian Wars, Cora isn't afraid of the white man who removed her to a school across the country to be civilized. When teachers burn her beloved buckskin and beaded doll, Winona, Cora discovers that the spirit of Winona may not be entirely lost. A modern masterpiece, A Council of Dolls, is gorgeous, quietly devastating, and ultimately hopeful, shining a light on the echoing damage wrought by Indian boarding schools and the historical massacres of indigenous people. With stunning prose, Mona Susan Power weaves a spell of love and healing that comes alive on the page. That piques my interest as well. We're going back to historical novels. The fourth one, The End of Drum Time by Hanna Pylväinen, published by Holt. It's 1851 at the edge of the Arctic Circle, and things are changing quickly. The church outpost that Lars Levy, a fervent Lutheran minister, mans is a rugged, sparsely populated one. But as the zeal of his teachings mounts, so does the attendance at the weekly service he holds. The Sami reindeer herders he's been sent to minister to are skeptical of the Christian values and strict rules he preaches. But when Bietar, one of the Sami's most respected herders, has a dramatic religious awakening on the shortest day of the year, more and more of the Sami people become ready to let their long-held traditions and beliefs give way to new ones. Bietar's new commitment to Lars and his teachings means that Bietar's son, Ivar, is left to tend the family's reindeer herd alone, an increasingly impossible task. Meanwhile, Lars's daughter, Willa, has always been the picture of obedience, until a chance encounter with Ivar leads to an infatuation that becomes gradually something more. When a catastrophic illness threatens the life of her young brother, everything she's ever believed is called into question, making her feel reckless and free in a way she's never been before. Gorgeously written and stunning in scope, The End of Drum Time is both a powerful immersion into a rich and sometimes forgotten culture and a celebration of a beautiful, ancient way of life. It masterfully weaves together the complex geopolitics and rich tradition of 19th century Scandinavia, brings to life a people caught between an old way of life and the new, and asks how what we believe shapes the course of our lives. Nominated for the National Book Award in the United States. Blackouts by Justin Torres, published by Farrar, Straus, and Giroux. Out in the desert in a place called the Palace, a young man tends to a dying soul, someone he once knew briefly but who has haunted the edges of his life. Juan Gay, playful raconteur and child lost and found and lost, guardian of the institutionalized, has a project to pass along to this new narrator. It is inspired by a true artifact of a book, Sex Variants, a study in homosexual patterns, which contains stories collected in the early 20th century from queer subjects by a queer researcher, Jan Gay, whose groundbreaking work was then co-opted by a committee, her name buried. As Juan waits for his end, he and the narrator trade stories, moments of joy and oblivion, and resurrect lost loves, lives, mothers, fathers, minor heroes. The past is with us, beside us, ahead of us. What are we to create from its gaps and erasures? You might have recognized the sort of structure a little bit, because here it says, inspired by A Kiss of the Spider-Man, Pedro Pramo, Voodoo Macbeth, the book at its own center, and the woman who created it, oral history, and many more texts, images, and influence, Justin Torres' Blackouts is a work of fiction that sees through the inventions of history and narrative. An extraordinary work of creative imagination, it insists that we look long and steady at the world we have inherited and the world we have made, a world full of ghostly shadows and flashing moments of truth. And I think we already reached the last of the 10 books. This is Holler, Child, stories by LaToya Watkins, and published by Tiny Reparations Books. In Holler Child's 11 brilliant stories, LaToya Watkins presses at the bruises of guilt, love, and circumstance. Each story introduces us to a character irrevocably shaped by place and reaching towards something hope, reconciliation, and freedom. In Cutting Horse, the appearance of a horse in a man's suburban backyard places a former horse breeder in trouble with the police. In the title story, Holler, Child, a mother is forced into an impossible position when her son gets in a kind of trouble she knows too well from the other side. And Time After shows us the unshakable bonds of family as a sister journeys to find her estranged brother, the one who saved her many times over. Throughout Holler Child, we see love lost and gained and grief turned to hope. Much like LaToya Watkins' acclaimed debut novel Parish, this collection peers deeply into lives of women and men experiencing intimate and magnificent reckonings, exploring how race, power, and inequality map on the individual and demonstrating the mythic proportions of everyday life. This completes the long list. What are your thoughts about it? I was surprised that we have, that they sort of ignored a lot of very famous authors like Lauren Groff, for example, out with her new novel, like the two-time winner Jasmine Ward, like even, I didn't had her on my prediction list as well, Barbara Kingsolver and her Super Trooper, Pulitzer Prize winning, Women's Prize winning book, Demon Copperhead. So, but they decided to go for others. They decided to nominate as much as 4 historical novels, which I think is very interesting, that the look back into the history is very important in this year's selection of long-listed books. They also decided to present a very diverse list, which I absolutely welcome in terms of representation of people of color, of Afro-American literature, of queer literature. This is all given into the list. And there are a couple of books that I'm really, really keen to read. And I repeat which ones are my favorites here. I still have to read Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. I definitely want to do this. I didn't have the time during the summer. Ponyboy could be interesting. It's not that much that I say I love to read Pony book, but it could be interesting to me. I definitely want to read the short stories about Black Muslim people in the US. That will be Temple Folk by Aaliyah Bilal. So that is the second title I go for. The third title will be Third title will be A Council of Dolls by Mona Susan Power. These three are my favorites, I think, on the list. Maybe even Holler Child, the stories by LaToya Watkins. So these 4 books are sort of interesting to me. Which ones are interesting to you? Which book do you think should have been on that long list but was missed by the jury? We always have these kind of feelings, don't we? But I see literature awards more as suggestions of books that we might read. We are never forced to read a whole long list as long as we are not members of the jury, of course. But that won't happen in the near future, at least in my case. So please slap me a like, write a comment down below, and also subscribe to the channel. You help me so much. Thank you very much for doing this, for watching this, and I say adios, goodbye und auf Wiedersehen.